Yeah, absolutely. And so in the paper, first we start by sketching these psychological threats can emerge from AI deployment efforts. And like I said, there are the three broad categories of threats to competence, threats to autonomy, and threats to relatedness. And then in the second part of the paper, what we're doing is that basically we are starting asking that question. You're just asking, saying, what kind of reactions can we expect people to engage in if they feel threat? And we're building basically on literature on coping, and we argue that uh, five key reactions will be especially common, and they vary in the extent to which they are positive or adaptive and the extent to which they are negative for the organization and for the employee.
Welcome to The Ripple Effect, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the minds of Wharton faculty. I'm your host, Dan Loney, and in each episode, we'll be diving deep into the inspiration behind the groundbreaking research that Wharton professors have conducted and exploring how their findings resonate with the world today. Well, not only will generative AI impact the work that we do on a daily basis, there is a belief that it could impact how we think about work and could lead to providing threats towards how we go about work on a daily basis. This is the genesis of some research done by a group of professors, including our next guest, Stefano Puntoni, who is a professor of marketing here at the Wharton School. Stefano, always great to talk with you. How are you doing?
Thanks, Dan, for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So this is one of the many areas that we continue to see kind of evolving right now, I guess, into how AI is impacting so many different aspects of our lives, in this case, due to work.
Yeah, so I'm a consumer researcher, so a lot of my research is on the user of the technology, the researcher, the consumer. But I think one of the biggest areas of interest for companies thinking about AI deployment is about the impact on employees. Because obviously this technology is going to be useful only to the extent that people are going to use it. And so understanding adoption patterns and psychological reactions to AI tools is going to be very important to understand the impact of AI programs.
So we're talking about this in the scope of the employee, but how important is it for the employer to recognize this as they're kind of putting a lot of these processes in place?
Yeah, so if you look at this, almost every company today has some kind of AI deployment plan where basically they are talking to tech vendors or consultants or doing in-house. They develop some kind of tool. It might be something like a generative AI engine, like a ChatGPT type of corporate version of it. And basically the idea would be that this technology has a promise of accelerating innovation, accelerating productivity, making firms faster and better at what they do. But this technology is really only going to have an impact to the extent that employees, the people who do the work in organizations, find a way of using it, find a way to integrate effectively these tools into their workflows, integrating it with their competence and expertise. And so that requires, a lot of changes to the way we think about work. And oftentimes, companies are not thinking enough about the psychological aspect. And so I advise companies who that are interested in deploying AI at scale within their organization to have almost two parallel tracks. One is a tech track where you're working with your technology teams and outside vendors to deploy solutions that work. And so you have a lot of concerns about data safety and compliance and performance and benchmarks and all of that. But then at the same time, you also need to marry that technical effort with the management and leadership effort, which is targeted at employees to understand and explain what are we doing, why are we doing it, what's in it for the employee, if it's going to be actually a threat to their career and livelihood, or is it going to be benefiting them in some way, and how can you do that with an authentic voice? So I think it's important to have both going at the same time. If you do only the technical stuff, but you drop the ball on the communication and leadership piece, I think you cannot expect very good results.
What are some of these threats that you believe are able to come forward here?
In our paper, we basically adopt a very famous psychological theory that we find useful to help organize our thoughts in this area. And basically, we say that psychological well-being is really a function of experiencing feelings of competence, of autonomy, and of relatedness. These are the components of this self-determination theory, theory going back to the 80s, so it's been around for a long time. But basically, these are three important antecedents of psychological well-being, and then we basically argue that Gen AI can have important benefits for all of those. It can make you feel more competent when all of a sudden you're able to do things that you couldn't do on your own before, because Gen AI makes it possible, for example, to do advanced analytics using natural language. It can be, empowering, so it can give you feelings of autonomy when you realize that now you can do this. So there is a sense also of being independent and not being able to rely on others. And it can help relatedness when basically these chatbots are creating these seamless parasocial experiences and can embed, themselves into a team or workflow. So there's these benefits, but at the same time, Gen AI can also be a threat to all of this, can be a threat to competence, all these discussions about jobs. And so all of a sudden people are wondering about the value of the skills, can be a threat to autonomy because now they feel that they have to adopt these tools and no longer are in control of their workflows. They have to delegate to these AI systems. And then it can be a threat to relatedness when you feel alienated from your team or from the company because you feel this has been deployed in a way that is threatening to you.
And seemingly, isn't it then kind of a fine line between the two in terms of the impact that an employee could feel or could see play out?
Yeah, so I think the potential is enormous for boosting psychological well-being, productivity, and performance. But the reality is that in many organizations, the conversation is not really oriented toward the psychological well-being and career advancements of the employees who start to use this technology. But a lot of the conversations in business around Gen AI are about cost cutting, about productivity increases to the detriment of headcount. And those conversations are clearly threatening to people. You cannot expect people to hear this stuff and thinking, yeah, that's fine by me. And so it seems like to me, there's a lot of potential for boosting psychological well-being of employees, but in practice, the way that lots of conversations are going are pointing in exactly the opposite direction.
Is there an element, and I know I've talked to you on different topics about the generational differences that are out there, older people in the workplace versus how younger people in the workplace experience everything. Is there an element of generational understanding that you have to have in this mix here? Because how the reaction of somebody who might be in his 40s or 50s and dealing with AI and seeing that impact for the first time might very well be different from somebody who's in their 20s or 30s and is much more digitally savvy.
Yeah, you need to be, one is to basically understand the situation of the person to be able to make some predictions as to what people are going to be finding psychologically threatening. Age is an obvious dimension, function maybe, also role of tasks, whatever. There might be more. Now, with regard to age, what's interesting about it is that on the one hand, we know, based on lots of research on technology adoption, that younger people tend to be faster and more keen on new technologies than older people. But in this case, there's also a lot to be worried about in terms of junior positions, because what we see is that Gen AI is being adopted in a way that oftentimes look like an AI intern. So a lot of entry-level positions are really being now kind of prioritized as something that you can do with AI, which actually might provide a greater actual threat to the employment of younger people more than older people. There is even some evidence that AI investments are slowing down career trajectory for older people while accelerating those for older people already more senior in the organization. So it's not obvious which way things are going to go.
But the other thing I wanted to ask you about is also the fact that not only is there the potential age component here, but you also have to think about the persona of the individual and the fact that, everybody's persona in many cases is different. So each person is going to react differently to a lot of these components.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in the paper, first we start by sketching these psychological threats that can emerge from AI deployment efforts. And like I said, there are the three broad categories of threats to competence, threats to autonomy, and threats to relatedness. And then in the second part of the paper, what we're doing is that basically we are starting asking that question you're just asking, saying, what kind of reactions can we expect people to engage in if they feel threat? And we're building basically on literature on coping, and we argue that 5 key reactions will be especially common. And they vary in the extent to which they are positive or adaptive, and the extent to which they are negative for the organization and for the employee. And so just to summarize them, there is one we call direct resolution, would be basically you feel a threat to, for example, your competence, and you decide to upskill yourself. For example, you sign up to a prompt engineering course to be able to be a proficient user of Gen AI that is tackling the threat directly to solve it and become then, a proficient user and benefit from it. The second one we talk about is symbolic self-completion, and that strategy is one where basically the employee is reminding themselves and others and underlying the role of human judgment. For example, you can imagine a consultant who, in the course of a presentation, underlines the human insights that are brought in. Then there is dissociation, where basically what you do is that you are trying to move away from Gen AI tools or Gen AI jobs. So, for example, a graphic designer might rediscover old-fashioned techniques. And as an element of this, there might be a component of sabotaging, trying to behave in a way that makes the AI fail, in a way. And so that's obviously not good for the company's effort to benefit from Gen AI. Then you have escapism, which is basically disengagement. I'm now can have Gen AI doing all this work, and I'm spending all my time scrolling on the phone. Clearly not good either. And then you have one called fluid compensation, which is trying to assess what's AI doing well and what is not doing so well, and then pivot a little bit, recalibrate your activity and your skills towards the areas where you feel AI is falling short. And so that's a more adaptive one again.
And so that's an interesting component that we'll touch on now, is that there is a bit of fluidity to AI right now in terms of how it's being implemented. And as you just alluded to, how we may see changes occur to better adapt AI to specific businesses as we move forward into the future. So this is still all very much a process in motion, isn't it?
Yeah, and the technology is changing really fast. So it's very difficult for people to feel sure footing. In fact, I believe that one source of threat for employees is precisely the pace of change. That people feel things are moving so fast, I can never catch up, and everybody's lagging behind. And I hear many organizations saying we are 1 year behind, but obviously if everybody's 1 year behind, then nobody's behind. But it's this feeling of a bit of FOMO, never knowing what's next and the next new gadget or whatever. So that is kind of destabilizing by definition almost. But then you have also this fact that as these capabilities change, it is difficult to say I should be investing in this. Like 2 years ago, everybody was talking about prompt engineering, and increasingly prompt engineering is kind of being embedded within these systems that are getting more and more sophisticated, for example, with the reasoning models. And some of these principles might not be worth all that much already. And so to what extent can we count, for example, on the technology not acquiring certain capabilities that right now seem safe from the point of view of an employee? It's difficult to say. And so I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty is actually part of the problem.
What do you think you and your colleagues take from this research that's most important for both companies and employees to truly understand about this moving forward?
Yeah, to me, the bigger picture here is that this technology is quite different from other previous waves of digital transformation. So if you went back maybe 10 years ago, maybe to the cloud computing revolution, what companies were doing was like major investments and big risk taking in saying we're shifting everything away from our service onto the cloud. We transform our IT function into basically pay-per-use, so service, and we're going to get our IT needs satisfied that way. Now, that was a big change and it's a big deal, but if you think about the user of computers, imagine working in a company writing an email, whether the email sits on your desktop or is up in the cloud, you write the same email. So it doesn't necessarily require the organization to change the way that people work. It's a decision that will be made by the CTO and the CFO together with the leadership and say, is it good or bad? Go, no go decision. You pull the trigger and you do it. And so hopefully it works out. But then once it's deployed, then, you don't have to teach anything almost to anybody else, a little bit, but not much. While with this technology, because it's basically, we are using it to outsource cognitive labor, this technology is only going to be productive to the extent that people find clever ways of bending it into our workflows, of integrating AI into a function. And for that, you need the people in the function to do the work of integrating it. And so it requires now the whole organization to get on board. And so it's a much bigger, harder change management process. And as an academic outside business, what I'm lamenting a little bit is that so many of the conversations in the media, proclamation from CEOs for investors relations or trying to boost the share price. You heard Klarna recently or Duolingo or whatever. That basically they emphasize headcount reduction, and of course, companies operating in a competitive environment, they ought to find the efficiencies that they can find. But if the only thing we can find around AI is what do we do in order to fire people, that's not inspiring to anybody in the organization. It's only a threat. And so I think we need to have a conversation that is also trying to bring employees into the picture and say, what's in it for them? How do you help use Gen AI to make them more successful, to capitalize on their expertise, to elevate the status, accelerate the career, or maybe even simply give them an afternoon off if they can be more productive. Do something for them. And I think that conversation is often missing.
Stefano, always great to talk with you and get your insight. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dan. Great talking to you.
You got it. Stefano Puntoni, marketing professor here at the Wharton School. Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so that we can continue to bring you the best insight from the Wharton School.